Wow. Thank you, all of you, for sharing your stories. And I just want to ask if you can follow up on, I really liked the sort of theme that was coming through all of this of having the space to find your true identity. And I think borrowing from the experience with the middle school students and Adduce as educators, I wonder if you could think about if you could make one change at Seattle University, or maybe if you came back in 5 years and you talked to students at Seattle University 5 years from now, what do you think we could shift that would most create that space for our students?
One thing from my personal experience, I know the financial burden of paying for college is always super nuanced and very different for a lot of students. I'm an out-of-state student. This is my first time ever in Washington. I have no family here, no friends here, and so I think always offering sort of spaces for students to be transparent about like where they are, because I moved from a place where I was definitely a majority socioeconomic wise, and then coming here sort of definitely like sort of an exception. And so I think always putting those sort of resources at the forefront when students enter sort of college. I know there's a lot of things that kids can like sort of seek out, but I think having people to continually check in so that they don't have this sort of lack of community and lack of sort of support really can make a difference, and so that they don't have like a 4-year-long process of like isolating themselves and not really navigating those sort of resources. So I think definitely remembering that reaching out and making those connections and sort of providing sort of mentors for students would be awesome.
Yeah, I think also one of the aspects of Seattle University that makes people want to come here is the mission of social justice. And I think that while I've been here for the past 4 years, I've seen that a lot of students have struggled with what that meant, like what social justice looks like, that I might have a different definition than someone who's sitting next to me in class. And maybe certain ideas of social justice are the ones that are actually being perpetuated the most at Seattle University, and others are kind of not. So I think for a lot of students who also do a lot of organizing work on campus, who continuously do that kind of work and don't really see their idea of social justice being reflected in the university is sometimes frustrating for Seattle U students.
I think encouraging students to share their stories is really important, whether that be through the residence halls when like your first couple of years here, or even in class. I can think of a specific class during fall quarter of this academic year. The professor asked us as an icebreaker to just go around and share the story behind our name. So how we were named, or where our name came from. And through that, even though that's such a small part of who we are, even through that you can share a little bit about yourself and you form connections with other students, whether or not it's intentional. So I think just opening up spaces for students to be able to talk a little bit more about who they are and where they've come from.
I think for me, something that happens a lot for students on our campus is the lack of transparency around what's actually happening on campus, particularly around diversity and inclusion efforts and other efforts kind of across the campus. And I think that there's a lot that can be said about people who show up and tell the truth of what they're doing, and maybe what are the barriers or challenges that are coming in the way of like getting to that end goal that students would really appreciate and actually resonate with, and honestly respect and build trust with the institution in a way that you just don't get when you're not being as transparent with students about what is happening within the structure and the hierarchy or the organizational systems of the institution, and maybe what are the barriers that are like keeping you from being able to get to those end goals that students are really asking for, and letting them be a part of the conversation and even letting them help you solve the problem.
Hello, again, thank you all 4 of you for sharing such wonderful stories about the work you've done, about experiences, about everything about topics that were very meaningful to you. I very much appreciate it. Now specifically, something that came up for me in your talk was that every day you were encouraged to bring your whole self to work, to bring your whole self, to bring your stories, to bring your experiences, to bring your emotions. And I think that's something I saw reflected in all of your work. Like you really truly brought your whole self. It was truly something reflected, like something deeply profound in you. And I thank you for sharing that with us. But what I've thought of is that for me to bring my whole self and to want to serve a marginalized community, want to serve a community, I may struggle with that, especially in the aspect of telling stories, because I realize, as I have worked in classrooms of marginalized backgrounds, and I have worked in classrooms of privileged backgrounds, and I've realized, like, I've come from a very privileged background. I haven't really had to worry too much about systematic or institutional oppression. I haven't really had to worry about too much would I get home safe from school. I haven't had to worry too much about where my next meal is coming from. I've been very lucky. But still, I've wanted to relate and wanted to help marginalized communities. But I struggle with that because I don't always have the storybook. Like, I literally have a book here with blank pages, but like that's how I feel when entering into those spaces. So how would you address that? How would you address like that aspect of like trying to fill in those pages, so to say?
Yeah, I think one of the aspects I think of my story was also that I was serving my own community that was very similar to me and identical to me at some points. So bringing my whole self was kind of just how I could do the best work that I could do. But I think from like what you're talking about, of coming from a privileged background, I think a lot of the times our communities, marginalized communities, know what they need, but they don't know how to ask for it because they haven't been listened to for so long. So even if I come, like for example, my work at the middle school, if I ask students what do they need, they oftentimes don't tell me because for so long they've been telling people and no one's been giving them what they need. But I think to like work really hard and to like be diligent to listen to people and to work that's already happening in the community that you want to serve, because many communities are already doing their own organizing work, and to just to figure out the best way to support them.
Yeah, and I think that's a brilliant question, asking sort of this idea of like, if I have this privilege, like how do I find this entry passage into like a space? And I think it's important to, you can just do further analysis, on like, there's so many things that you can bring to the table, and I think, yeah, again, sort of, I was going to say just listening, but also just like centering narratives, and you can that you want to support. And I feel like giving support doesn't always have to be bringing something vocally to the table. Support can just be solidarity, it can be silence, it can be any of those ways. Offering resources if you are a person of privilege, maybe redistributing something that it doesn't cost you anything to sort of give those sort of resources to folks who don't have it. So yeah, I think like you don't have to sort of think too heavily about like, oh my God, like what do I say, what do I do, how do I act if I don't have these experiences? It's more of just being a resource to people, and maybe just making that available to folks who don't have them.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I also come from a pretty privileged background as well. And something that I learned in my program that's actually sat with me for a really long time now is we're not here to save people. We're not saviors, and we're here to be in community with one another, and we're here to share in the mutual kind of like benefits of what we can all build together. And I think very much like Alexis is saying, like, I don't think you have to come to the table with anything to give or anything to fix the problem. I think just by showing up, being authentic, being genuine about who you are and where you come from and how that's shaped you as a person, and those experiences will really resonate with people, because there are so many experiences that we all individually have that are so interconnected. And if we just show up to be there, to be supportive, and to not save anyone, I think that you will be able to build a lot of really deep and meaningful connections with other people.